Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I see that a few of you are starting to join us. Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by MEPAL and UPS. I'm Kayla Gentry, your host, the Manufacturing Outreach Manager for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership of Louisiana, or as we like to say, MEPAL. We're a couple of minutes from starting. I'm going to allow a few more minutes for a few more people to log on here. Today's topic is continuity of supply risk assessment with a presentation by UPS. Continuity of supply risk assessment is the fourth webinar in a series of webinars over the next few weeks focusing on COVID-19 updates and business best practice strategies. Please be on the lookout for upcoming webinars each month from us. As a participant, your audio will be in listen-only mode using your phone or computer, whichever is more convenient for you. During the webinar, there is an opportunity, of course, to ask questions using the question window. Add your question there for us, and we'll address those as time allows at the end of the presentation. This is a live webinar, which will be recorded. The recording will be made available on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days for you. So as I said, I'm going to allow a few minutes and we'll get started right at 2 o'clock. All right, I see a few more of you have just joined us and it is 2 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. For those of you just now joining us, I am Kayla Gentry, Manufacturing Outreach Manager of MEPAL. I would like to give a little bit of information about the organization before we get started, if any of you are unfamiliar with us. So the Manufacturing Extension Partnership is part of a national network under the National Institute of Standards and Technology that works with U.S. manufacturers to create and retain jobs, increase profits, save time and money, develop new customers, and expand into new markets. As you can see by the map on your screen, by national network, we mean there is an MEP in every state, including Puerto Rico. MEPAL is also part of the Louisiana Community and Technical College System, or LCTCS. As such, we're better able to cover the state of Louisiana as a whole, with project managers located at community colleges throughout the state. The webinar today will be presented by Raghavendra Ramamurthy, Inventory Solutions Manager in the Supply Chain Optimization Practice Area of UPS Customer Solutions. Mr. Ramamurthy has 15 years of supply chain experience in operations planning, logistics, and process improvement. Over the course of his career, he worked in a number of diverse supply chain functions: inventory management, sales and operations planning, sourcing, logistics, network optimization, and internal audit. He had an opportunity to manage teams and engage in supply chain process improvements process across the retail, apparel, food, carpet, and industrial sectors, implementing strategic initiatives and delivering cost savings. Raghu has a bachelor's degree in textile technology from Bangalore University, India, Master of Science degree in textile technology with a concentration in apparel supply chain from University of Massachusetts, and a Master of Business Administration degree in Supply Chain and Strategy from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute of New York. Raghu will now walk you through supply chain strategies for both long and short term, as well as how to proactively identify and mitigate supply risks while overcoming supply chain disruptions. And Raghu, I'm going to go ahead and transfer the screen over to you so that you can get started here.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen. So agenda for today is really the hot topic on continuity of supply risk assessment as we deal with the middle of the COVID or post-COVID, or even prepare your supply chains for the next supply chain disruption. Continuity of supply risk is really a key topic that's resonating on how do we think about what we need to do in the supply chain organization to equip us for being more resilient in the coming years or for the next decade. So I'm going to start with some basic terminologies, basics of the risk management, and then move on to supply chain strategies, both from a long-term as well as a short-term perspective. So with that, so when you think about disruptions or continuity of supply, disruption is any event that affects the planned product flow. Whether the product flow is not getting the product you need, or even it could also mean getting something that you don't need. For example, a bad quality product that even though you might receive the inventory or of the product, you might not be able to utilize it to fulfill your demand, customers' demand. And then continuity is absence of that disruption. And resiliency is the amount of time it takes to recover. So in terms of thinking about continuity of supply risk, it's about how well you are equipped in terms of your supply chain to be not affected through the disruption, as well as mitigating the risks that arise out of the disruption. So when you think about disruption, there's several types of disruption. Natural disasters such as hurricane or earthquakes, and then you have the product supply issues, which could be at your raw material vendors or your factories or production facilities, like an example of fire at a manufacturing facility, or a force majeure from a vendor. Then you have logistics related disruptions, such as a port strike or a port congestion. And then there could be a disruption from the product itself being unavailable, such as a product recall or a quality issue of the product. And then we have other disruptions, which could be one-time events, such as the COVID situation. The impacts of disruption can really be measured along the timeline. The longer the time the disruption prevails, the more impact it would have for the business. So it starts with the short supply of the product, leading to back orders or stockouts, then impacting the revenue and eroding the margin, and then finally ramifications with investor value with lengthy recovery time. So as you think through the different phases of the disruption, once we recognize the disruption, there could be a little bit of a buffer time where you might be looking to determine when you're supposed to have the product, as well as how much time you have with the existing level of inventory to service the existing demand. And then there is a cascading effect. Once the supply gets shut down, then once it starts to affect all the other functions or customers, that relates back to the lengthy recovery time. So it doesn't matter if you will have a disruption. It's a matter of when and how severe, and then what we can do in order to mitigate the disruption. So managing disruptions can be looked at as at an operational level, which is short-term as well as strategic, which could be long-term as well. And the key steps of disruption would be to think in terms of assessing and identifying the risk, determining the likelihood and impact, as well as coming up with mitigating the risk as well as contingency planning. When we think about the process maturity at different organizations, it really starts with evaluating what the supply risk is and what the cost to mitigate that risk. So for every product supply and the demand decision we make, evaluating that risk versus cost is key. From there, implementing warning or decision systems can really enable mitigating the risks at an operational level. And then from there, if you really want to understand how your supply chain is set up to deal with a disruption, then really creating a disruption in an artificial mode and simulating and modeling it so that you can understand what the impact would be if a disruption would hit to your supply chain. So let's look at a few examples of determining the likelihood and the impact. When we think about vendor force majeure, it's really like a medium risk where the likelihood is low, depending on how much due diligence you would have done in onboarding the vendor. When it occurs, the impact would be high. So overall, it's a medium risk versus a vendor bankruptcy. It's a high risk. It's really shuts down the supply. And then we consider an example of a port strike or a congestion, depending on what optionality you have set up for your supply chain. It could be medium risk, with the likelihood of being high. And then the impact would be a little bit towards the medium. When we look at some of the recurring instances of the port strike, we had one in 2002, Long Beach, where the port strike almost prevailed for almost 28 days. But then a company A would had contingencies in plan to move the product or route the product maybe to Savannah or Charleston port, could quickly recover within that time frame, within a month. Whereas a company who only had were bringing in product only through Long Beach, it took them 6 months to recover. Then we have supplier operational issues, maybe a production line going down for a couple of weeks or maybe a few days, where it could be rectified through process improvement. It could be categorized as low risk. And then the vendor product quality. Again, this one depends on what level of product quality issue that prevails with the time of the quality issue. It could be either a low risk or a medium risk. So as we think about the future, especially the port strike, we have the longshoreman contract that will be expiring in July of 2022. So it will be interesting to see how that situation will evolve from the last time when we had this issue in 2015. It created a ripple effect in terms of creating some asset issues in terms of the trucking industry. So
before you move on here, do you want me to go ahead and launch that poll question for you?
Yeah. So we'll launch the first poll question before I get to the supply chain strategies. So Kayla will bring up the poll.
Okay. What is a recent disruption, non-COVID related, within your supply chain? If you could select all that apply here: natural disaster, product supply issue, logistics related, product recall or quality, or other. All right, and I see some of you are getting your votes in. I'm going to give this just a minute for you guys to get your vote in. I see that we've got about 50% of you that have voted so far. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And it looks like, let me share this with you guys. 75% of you said natural disaster, 25% said product supply issue, and 38% said logistics related. Go ahead, Raghu.
Yeah, so Kayla, actually, if you don't mind, you could even bring up the next poll as well. That will fit in nicely with this slide as well.
Sure. Okay, the next poll is launched. Identify a strategy or a technique you have used to manage the effects of supply chain disruption. If you could select one of these: procure more inventory, collaborate with upstream suppliers, customer allocation, risk management, or other. And I'm going to give this one just a minute as well for you guys to get your votes in. Okay, a minute has passed. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share. Most of you said procure more inventory. 14% of you said collaborate with upstream suppliers. A few of you said risk management, and a couple of you said other as well. Go ahead, Raghu.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting results. So especially on the first poll, in terms of the risk, disruption that has impacted your supply chain, natural disaster came out as the top. Next came in as the supplier issue. So I would have expected supplier issue to be on the top, but as you can see, the importance of all of the different types of disasters. So with the recent poll, procuring more inventory, a lot of times that could not be an option too, right? So with depending on the short supply issue prevailing on the upstream. So when we think about how do we manage disruption short and long term, that can correlate to the operational level as well as strategic level. Short term being impacted impacts the operational, and then long term strategic. We can really think about different supply chain strategies. Next couple of slides, I'll walk you guys through some of these strategies. So really starting at a high level, the restructuring the sales and operations planning process before or during the disruption, and then utilizing cost to serve while you are in the disruption or after the disruption hits to use that cost to serve to provide the optionality to your business in terms of the order fulfillment. And then from a strategic standpoint, we could implement several processes related to sourcing and procurement optimization that can further enable providing more optionality in terms of preparing your supply chain. And then lastly, building or utilizing a resilient optimized network options. So let's start with the sales and operation planning process. So as we know, sales and operation planning process is a fact-based process by which we try to balance the supply and demand to meet the overall strategic and financial goals. And during the disruption, it becomes very critical that we constantly evaluate the risks versus the cost trade-off on every demand and supply planning decision. So while we are middle of the supply risk, utilizing some of the elements of a typical sales and operation planning process would be key in order to drive the profitability. To take it further, there are certain aspects of the sales and operation planning process where you could restructure that and really provide a good enabler in terms of mitigating the risk. So starting with the product review, here you're really focusing on what can we do in terms of the products that are in the growth and maturity phase, and really not focusing on the introduction or the decline phase can really make a big difference. Understanding the key market driver assessment in terms of where the consumer demand is shifting, or any customers are more tilting towards any substitute products, or they're willing to accept a little bit of a lower tier quality product. And then also, most importantly, looking at bringing transparency with your customers on synchronizing with their requirements and validating those requirements with your product availability is key. Then when we think about demand review, while the usual outcome of demand review in an S&OP process is consensus forecasting, while during the disruption, that conversation or the objective will need to shift towards demand shaping. Demand shaping with a supply in mind. What it means is identifying the supply issues, such as whatever amount of inventory you have, and creating sales programs that can help you to gain control of the demand. Things like prioritizing fulfilling demand for high versus low gross margin customers or products, revisiting service time commitments, whether your original commitment is to ship it ASAP or within the end of the day or 48 turnaround, maybe revisiting those with your collaborative customers, buying some time, and then validating their demand and forecast, the customer's forecast, and then allocating the demand to high gross margin customers, and then maybe also to the high gross margin products as well. And then look for opportunities for product substitution. And then finally, utilizing some pricing strategies so that you can little bit control the inflow of demand when you have situation where majority of the customers are trying to book all of the inventory that you have, and resulting in competing price wars and disappointing customers. So in order to alleviate that issue, resorting to some pricing strategy so that you can stagger the demand and then buy some time. Then when you consider the supply review and the reconciliation, when it comes to materials planning, sharing those revised demand plans with upstream supply partners, especially the revisiting the available supply, as well as developing advanced segmented buy commitments instead of placing all of the requirements all at once on your vendors and putting a strain on their production line or their raw material availability. And then also offering some working capital support, maybe temporarily offer some reduced payment terms with your vendors that can really provide some relief for your vendors who might be getting to that tipping point of getting financially distressed. And then with respect to balancing your supply with that revised demand plan, developing inventory policies at the customer level instead of the SKU level, and then really focusing on the service level optimization, focusing on like guaranteed customer lead time commitments instead of preset service levels, can really play a critical role. Continuing with the supply review, capacity planning, there will be a need to optimize and revisit the available production and distribution capacity more frequently, updated more or so weekly instead of a regular monthly cadence as part of your regular S&OP process. So this would be, updating that weekly would really gain a good full picture for you to understand what the ramifications are of how much supply you could manufacture or produce to meet the demand. And then identifying and securing some available logistics capacity, especially with pre-booking air or trucking with your preferred carrier base, can really help with the executional logistics execution aspect of fulfilling and shipping the demand. And then when it comes to reconciliation, really taking a stab at looking at different testing the different capacity and production scenarios of understanding what the prolonged shutdown, if it extends beyond 2 weeks or 4 weeks or or even 6 weeks, laying out those scenarios and understanding what the impact to your fulfilling the customer demand would be. And then based on that, also running some what if scenarios that would include upside, downside demand, as well as demand for the strategic products that can really paint a picture of whether there will be a need for onboarding or allocating more volume for your backup vendors. From here, while you're in the disruption, utilizing cost to serve analysis and using that decision points to interface with your order fulfillment systems can also play a key role. Cost to serve analysis really looks at end-to-end supply chain cost, and based on the available options you have within your supply chain, capturing the lane cost, site cost, as well as product cost. And for every possible alternative route of flowing the product, if you understand the cost to serve, you can really know how much profit you're giving up in providing and fulfilling the demand. And utilizing that to hard code all of those logic and rules on the key decisions the cost to serve is going to point to, and that could lead to temporary SKU rationalization or a customer allocation and prioritization. Available sourcing options, whether you need to shift the volume from your supplier A to a supplier B or a C, and alternative routings of the product, and all of that would have cost ramifications, and cost to serve would really provide you the basis for that decision making at an operational level. And then lastly, the customer pricing options, whenever you have to resort to some of the sales pricing options to control the demand, it can really give you the basis to make those decisions as well. And then operationally, by integrating that analysis into your order fulfillment systems, such as warehouse management or order management system, it can really help to automate the generating those rules and translating the cost to serve analysis recommendation into rules that you could integrate into your wave process. Now moving on to the long term, when we think about managing disruptions, both from a strategic standpoint and relates to a long term, supplier management and sourcing is a key. When you think about the transactional sourcing, usually you'll find preset supplier segmentation, whether it's A, B, and C based on your total spend with vendors, and then maybe a operational evaluation of your supplier performance, maybe on a handful of key metrics, such as maybe on time, PO on time delivery, or a quality metric. But it needs to be more than that, right? So shifting gears into the strategic sourcing, where you really understand the spend, not from a total spend by vendor, but also spend analysis that care towards identifying the spend for your critical and products, as well as strategic suppliers, and utilizing supplier scorecards that are comprehensive in nature, and then utilizing supplier collaboration through collaborative planning and forecasting that can really help your upstream partners to gain insights into your PO buying patterns. And then finally, identifying through scenario planning, identifying the viable alternative and backup suppliers. So really, starting with the spend analysis, understanding the spend patterns by region, by vendor, and product will really help you identify the supplier list for critical products wherever you might have all of the eggs in one basket, and really understanding who your at-risk suppliers are. So when it comes to supplier spend analysis, really slicing and dicing your PO data by not only by supplier but also by product, by region, by geography, and by upstream, even raw materials, can really provide insights into where those risks are. And then also utilizing some predictive analytics on what the spend forecast will be if you were to continue to place POs with your existing vendor base. And then analyzing your current spend can also provide insights into your dependent demand patterns that can really, if you could share that with your upstream partners, it can really help them utilize that for maintaining inventory or coming up with inventory stock levels for their supply chain. So, so it's an example of what that spend segmentation really, capturing that trend and spend by region and then by product category can really provide a lot of insights. Then moving on to the supplier scorecard, but that is more comprehensive enough, not only just at an operational level, but also strategic focus. where you are measuring your suppliers not only on service and delivery and cost, but also on their quality as well as overall strategic capabilities. The operational aspects of service and delivery can be quantitative assessment driven, but the qualitative assessment can also be driven out of the key stakeholders within your organization who directly or indirectly utilize in the services of that vendor and giving them a chance to rate that vendor. So all of that together ties back to a vendor scorecard that you could really utilize to onboard supplier evaluation as well as development programs, and then also utilize the results for really identifying at-risk suppliers. Then we also could do some modeling in terms of scenario planning as you resort for looking at as you identify those at-risk suppliers and look for viable alternative and backup suppliers. It also becomes important to understand the cost structure of those alternative vendors. So understanding the total cost trade-off, whether based on which regions they are in, the product flows and the supply sources, and then any leverage you would have to utilize any free trade agreements, and then making well-formed informed decisions based on those trade-offs can really help you to gain a picture on those risk mitigation versus the cost impact. And then this also enables more proactive sourcing so that you could have backup vendors in place and then understand the cost structure and exactly know when you could start to utilize them based on your cost to serve. And then also optimize your inventory cost and drive profitability. So while beyond the numbers, while all of the previous strategies were all numbers driven, then beyond the numbers, we could also do a supplier risk assessment where you could really start with some basic risk assessment that really focuses on, for each of your critical suppliers, assessing financial risk, macroeconomic risk based on the regions they are located, reputational risk based on some credit bureau scores, as well as geopolitical risk in the country that they are operating in, and any catastrophic risk, and then overall supply risk. And if from here, you could also transition to a deep dive supply risk assessment, a supplier risk assessment as well, that focuses on little bit detailed supplier financial risk, leveraging their sharing of their financial data, and then also doing a full depth analysis of their through qualitative risk on their company. Examples like process controls, the amount of years in the business, any business expansions plans they have, as well as the compliance and the type of customers that they service. And then also overlaying that with industry risk for the supplier that based on their main product line. So all of these risk assessment can really help you to understand. Once the first step would be to identify the at-risk suppliers. The second step would be to get a fair understanding of what the risk impact is based on the results of a risk assessment. Then when it comes to risk assessment, also you could do a risk assessment at a product category as well, really mapping out that product category at an upstream level. In this example, say if you're a manufacturer and distributor of a medical gloves, and if you map out the tier 1 and tier 2 types of suppliers, you could get market intelligence on these types of suppliers and the level of risk based on prevailing market conditions, whether there is enough capacity or supply versus demand, or whether there is more demand versus supply. And then also gets insights on the price forecast as well. And then using all of that and providing an upstream supply chain risk assessment, that you could make some proactive decisions to reduce their supply risk by changing or adding your backup suppliers, or procuring more inventory temporarily, or change the product flow. And then finally, from a long-term perspective, building and utilizing a resilient and optimized network where it's really strategic long-term focus, where you consider the business growth, your key market drivers, and your volumes for the next 5 to 10 years. And then while you find typical network optimization or a transportation optimization might focus more on minimizing the cost or improving your delivery times. Here in this exercise, it will be more to look at from raw material supplier to your end customer, and then optimizing the product flow to minimize the risk, and then create those alternative network options where you could utilize them as backup option when it comes to mitigating the disruption impacts. So here in the network optimization, you could really look at whether you need to line up a 3PL provider or have a different DC footprint, 5 years, long-term perspective, as well as how that impacts your inventory, as well as the total customer service requirements. And then when it comes to transportation optimization, providing optionality with respect to maybe utilizing pool point networks or to basically enabling flowing the product differently, whether it's a pre-consolidation or a post-consolidation product flow, or a different type of for flowing the product, so that when the disruption hits, let's say it's a port congestion or you need to route the product to a different coast, and where there is trucking capacity limitations, you could look at have these options available so that you could flow the product differently. So to wrap it up, so we did review some of the key steps in terms of managing the disruption, assessing and identifying the supply risk, and then determining the likelihood and impact. And for those that are high impact and highly likelihood type of risks, so mitigating the risks through contingency planning. And then we reviewed some of the operational as well as strategic supply chain strategies that could really play a key role in terms of mitigating the risk, either during, before or during the disruption, or after the disruption hits. Utilizing restructuring the sales and operation planning process, cost to serve analysis, interfacing with your order fulfillment systems, as well as utilizing from a long-term sourcing procurement optimization, and then building a resilient network. So with that, I do represent UPS, and we have a supply chain optimization practice area where we have about 60 consultants located globally, and we complete about 1,000 projects a year. And one of our strategic initiatives for UPS is to really support our small medium businesses in terms of really helping them mitigate their supply chain risks, and we do network optimization, transportation optimization, inventory optimization, and we are also offering a number of new solutions related to sourcing procurement optimization. So if for any of you, if all of the strategies that I just reviewed, if any of them sounds promising and you need more details or more support, please contact your UPS account manager, or you could also contact myself as well. So with that, also lastly, I would like to share when we typical results we achieve when we complete a network optimization or inventory optimization projects, along with some of the other services we offer. So with that, that's all I had, and would like to open up the floor for any questions or any feedback or any comments anybody might have.
Sure. So Raghu, if you want to share your camera here, I do have a question for you. And also, if any of you want to go ahead and ask questions in the question box, please, and I'm sure Raghu will be happy to answer. The first I see is, I saw that you had a scorecard for suppliers. I didn't see where a preferred customer strategy fit. In my experience in the chemical industry, we had a list of those preferred customers that the disruption to them should be minimized. So I'm guessing he's asking, where would you think that a preferred customer strategy would fit within your scorecard?
Yeah, the scorecard is more geared towards the supplier evaluation aspect of really identifying and segmenting your suppliers based on their operational performance as well as their strategic capabilities, and based on what you can do utilizing the results of the scorecard from a supply planning perspective. But to your question related to maybe a strategic customers, that would fall into some of the strategies I reviewed on demand shaping, and even restructuring your sales and operationing planning process, and understanding how you can really focus on those strategic customers and what you can do to prioritize fulfilling demand for those customers, such as maybe resorting to prioritizing the demand and validating the demand, and maybe collaborating more with them on validating the requirements for next month or 2 months or whatever it might be while you're in the disruption. So really collaboratively working with them and really controlling their demand flow so that you can service them better.
Okay. I just received another question as well. They said this webinar has been very informative. Could you share the presentation slides with us?
Absolutely.
And something we could do there, Raghu, is if you wanted to send those to me, I could definitely get those to the people that are asking for them. That's not a problem at all. And we'll also have this recording up on our YouTube channel to view as well, if you wanted to view the slides that way.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, it looks like that's about it as far as the questions. Let me double check here. All right, that looks like it's about it. Raghu, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Also, especially manufacturers, when we get out of this webinar, you will have a survey that will hit your mailbox. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us, it just helps us to tailor our content to kind of see where you are and what your needs are, so that we can make sure we're addressing what you need at the moment. That's kind of what happened with the supply chain webinar here. We had a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers state that they were needing more information about how to deal with their supply chain, especially with the state that we're in right now. So I hope that this has been informative for everyone. If anyone has any questions, of course, feel free to contact me as well, kayla.gentry@mepaul.org, and I will go ahead and close out. Thank you so much, Raghu. Thank you so much for your presentation and for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right.